Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I want to talk about building a budget-minded PC on Amazon. That is an entry-level gaming PC that will get you up and running with pretty much all modern AAA titles at about 1080p, roughly shooting for 60 FPS. Hopefully we're going to be shooting for around $500, but looking at prices earlier today, I'm guessing we're going to go a little bit over budget on that. So before we get started with the parts list, I do want to point out some things that you should actually try to do when you build a brand new PC, especially if it's your first time. There's a good chance you'll make some mistakes, and we all do. Even experienced PC builders don't get it completely right, whether you buy a component that's a little bit higher priced than you really should have, or you invest a little bit too much money in a component that you really shouldn't be investing all that much money in. For example, when I first built my first PC, I spent way too much money on a case and motherboard instead of spending it on core components that would have actually impacted gameplay, specifically the graphics card and to a lesser extent the CPU. So a couple tips before we hop into the parts list for those of you that are first-time builders. First and foremost, get a motherboard that's not expensive, but also one that supports the features that you really do plan on using, as well as supports upgrades down the road. So for example, since we're going to be going with a Ryzen system today in the parts list, we're sticking with a B350 motherboard. And yes, they're a little bit more expensive than an A320 motherboard, but they do support overclocking. So if you add a CPU cooler down the road, you can get quite a bit of extra performance by overclocking the processor. And the motherboard that I picked out has 4 RAM slots instead of just 2. And what that allows us to do is put in an 8GB kit of DDR4 memory. That's a 2x4 kit now, but then that leaves 2 RAM slots available for us to double that memory down the road by just getting the exact same kit again and just adding those sticks in after the fact. In addition, because we're sticking with an AM4 motherboard, this also allows us to upgrade the Ryzen 3 1200 that we're starting with down the road. If we ever want to go with a second generation Ryzen chip, we actually have that option because AMD has been great with supporting AM4 for multiple generations. Something we really wish Intel would actually try to do. So let's go ahead and hop over to the parts list now and take a look at what a really solid 1080p entry gaming PC looks like if you're buying it through Amazon now, and what type of prices you can expect to pay for that. So to get started with our budget-friendly Amazon build, these of course will be all new components. We're starting with the Ryzen 3 1200 processor for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost though, this processor and the platform in general gives us an upgrade path moving forward, whether we want to go with just a better first generation Ryzen part or even a second generation Ryzen part. We will be able to do that on this platform, but also the Ryzen 3 1200 will give us good performance in gaming, specifically at 1080p with the graphics card we're pairing with this processor. You should be able to hit the 60 FPS mark in pretty much all your titles, and since most of you building a budget computer will also be working with a budget-friendly monitor option, 60 Hz is going to be where you're going to cap out for most of those monitors, so the 1200 here is a perfect option to get started. And keeping upgradability in mind is also why we're going with the Asus Prime B350M. And the big thing here is that we have 4 RAM slots because we are only going to populate 2 of them with 4GB sticks of DDR4 RAM. That'll still give us 2 more slots that we can fill up later on down the road to come to a total of 16GB of RAM instead of the 8GB that we're just starting out with. And coming from a reputable brand is important here because we're guaranteed that this board will be compatible with second generation Ryzen parts in case we want to go forward with an upgrade into the second gen Ryzen parts instead of just upgrading the Ryzen 3 1200 to another first generation part. I already mentioned the memory here, but we're going with a Patriot Viper 4 series kit. This is 8GB at 3000 megahertz, at least it's rated for 3000 megahertz. Hopefully we can push it up to that rating. And sure, this memory kit is not very aesthetically pleasing with the red heat sinks along with the green PCB. But again, we are really more concerned about the price here. And if you are very concerned about how your computer ends up looking in the end, then sure, you can spend an extra $10 or so to get a better looking kit like a Corsair Vengeance LPX kit instead. But this kit will serve the purpose that it's needed for just perfectly. And with the chassis I actually picked for this build, you're not really gonna see it very much anyways. And to sort of round out our platform here, we have the EVGA GTX 1050 Ti. This is a really nice 1080p gaming card going for $200 right now on Amazon, though do be aware I have seen these elsewhere for about $170 as well as actually on Amazon possibly a different brand, not so much EVGA, but something like Gigabyte or MSI, has had cards for about $170 on Amazon, so you can find these cheaper. You just gotta sort of be patient and wait for a deal, but if you're not patient, $200 flat will get it done here. Then moving on to some of the other core components that we do need, we have a 1 terabyte 7200 RPM Western Digital Blue hard drive that'll get us up and running. Obviously, one of the first upgrades I would strongly recommend for anyone building a system like this is to put in an SSD for your boot drive, but 7200 RPM hard drives will get the job done, and they will give you plenty of storage for several different games to get off and running, whereas if you put in just an SSD to get started, you're going to be really limited on how many games you can install, so that's why we're going with a hard drive here. For the power supply, normally I recommend getting an 80 plus certified unit of some kind, but the deal on this EVGA 400 watt power supply is a really good one right now, even though it's not 80 plus certified, and I know that's a deal breaker for some of you, and if that is the case for you, then I highly recommend just, spending the extra money and getting yourself a power supply you're comfortable with. But this comes from a very reputable brand in EVGA, and as well as having a 2-year warranty for just $20. It's something to get you off the ground and running, and of course this can be a component you can replace down the line just for a little added peace of mind, but it will get you up and running and off the ground anyways. And we're going to be packing all this hardware into a Rosewill Micro ATX chassis, and the reason for this is simply it is very cheap right now. I don't know that I'm a huge fan of the interior layout of the chassis. I've never personally worked with this chassis before, but just looking at it, things are definitely going to be a little bit tight. You can definitely use that DVD drive bay up top to stuff some extra cables, since of course we're not putting in any kind of disk drive or 5 1/4 inch drive of any kind up there, so you can use that as your cable management area. It does look like maybe there's a tiny bit of room behind the motherboard tray to run some very thin cables, maybe like your SATA cables or that sort of thing. But again, this chassis does have a very minimalistic look, especially once it's actually built and the side panels are on it. It doesn't look like it has the greatest airflow, but none of our components are very hot in this build anyways, and adding fans is sort of a cheap proposition you can do later on down the road. So when you take all of the components here that we have from purely just Amazon, you can build a system packing a Ryzen 3 1200 with a GTX 1050 Ti and 1 terabyte of storage for just under $550. And of course, if you're really willing to look for the deals, you could probably pare this number down a little bit further. But of course, this was just sort of thrown together. And this is kind of about the price point that I would expect to pay in 2018 for this type of system anyways. So no computer build is perfect, and this parts list is no different. So what I want to know from you guys is, how would you change this build? What would you do differently if it was your money that you were buying a very budget-minded, you're going for 1080p, 60 FPS in most titles, very entry-level gaming PC? What would you change? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, if you like this content and you appreciate what we're doing here, give it a like, share, subscribe, and comment down below. Those things help out a lot. You can follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos over here from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.